Chapter 10 of A Series of Lessons in Raja Yoga. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Siddharth. A Series of Lessons in Raja Yoga by Yogi Ramacharaka. Chapter 10. The fifth lesson, the cultivation of attention. Part 1. In our last lesson, we called your attention to the fact that the yogis devote considerable time and practice to the acquirement of concentration, and we also had something to say regarding the relation of attention to the subject of concentration. In this relation, we shall have more to say on the subject of attention. The important things relating to the practice of Raja Yoga, and the yogis insist upon their students practicing systematically to develop and cultivate the faculty. Attention lies at the base of willpower, and the cultivation of one makes easy the exercise of the other. To explain why we lay so much importance to the cultivation of attention would necessitate our anticipating future lessons of this series, which we do not deem advisable at this time, and so we must ask our students to take our word for it, that all that we have to say regarding the importance of the cultivation of attention is occasioned by the relation of that subject to the use of the mind in certain directions, as will appear fully later on. In order to let you know that we are not advancing some peculiar theory of the yogis, which may not be in harmony with modern Western science, we give you in this article a number of quotations from Western writers and thinkers touching upon this important faculty of the mind, so that you may see that the West and the East agree upon this main point. However different may be their explanations of the fact or their use of the power gained by the cultivation of attention, as we said in our last lesson, the word attention is derived from two Latin words, ad tendere, meaning to stretch toward, which is really what attention is. The eye wills that the mind be focused on some particular object or thing, and the mind obeys and stretches toward that object or thing, focusing its entire energy upon it, observing every detail, dissecting, analyzing consciously and subconsciously, drawing to itself every possible bit of information regarding it, both from within and from without. We cannot lay too much stress upon the acquirement of this great faculty, or rather the development of it, for it is necessary for the intelligent study of Raja Yoga. In order to bring out the importance of the subject, suppose we start in by actually giving our attention to the subject of attention, and see how much more there is in it than we had thought. We shall be well repaid for the amount of time and trouble extended upon it. Attention has been defined as a focusing of consciousness, or if one prefers the form of expression, as detention in consciousness. In the first case, we may liken it to the action of the sun glass through which sun's rays are concentrated upon an object, the result being that heat is gathered together at a small given point, the intensity of the same being raised many degrees until heat is sufficient to burn a piece of wood or evaporate water. If the rays were not focused, the same rays and heat would have been scattered over a large surface and the effect and power lessened. So it is with the mind. If it is allowed to scatter itself over the entire field of a subject, it will exert but little power and the results will be weak. But if it is passed through the sun glass of attention, and focused first over one part and then over the other, and so on, the matter may be mastered in detail, and a result accomplished that will seem little less than marvelous to those who do not know the secret. Thomson has said, the experiences most permanently impressed upon consciousness are those upon which the greatest amount of attention has been fixed. Another writer upon the subject has said that attention is so essentially necessary to understanding that without some degree of the ideas and perceptions that pass through the mind seem to have no trace behind them. Hamilton has said, an act of attention, that is, an act of concentration, seems thus necessary to every exertion of consciousness, as a certain contraction of the pupil is requisite to every exertion of vision. Attention then is consciousness, what the contraction of the pupil is to sight, or to the eye of the mind, what the microscope or telescope is to the bodily eye. It constitutes the better half of all intellectual power. And Brodie adds, quite forcibly, it is attention much more than any difference in the abstract power of reasoning which constitutes the vast difference which exists between minds of different individuals. And Butler gives us this important testimony. The most important intellectual habit I know of is the habit of attending exclusively to the matter in hand. It is commonly said that genius cannot be infused by education, yet this power of concentrated attention, which belongs as a part of his gift to every great discoverer, is unquestionably capable of almost indefinite augmentation by resolute practice. And concluding this review of opinions and endorsements of that which the yogis have so much to say, and to which they attach so much importance, let us listen to the words of Beatty, who says, "The force wherewith anything strikes the mind is generally in proportion to the degree of attention bestowed upon it. Moreover, the great art of memory is attention, and inattentive people always have bad memories. There are two general kinds of attention. The first is the attention directed within the mind upon mental objects and concepts. The other is the attention directed outward upon objects external to ourselves. The same general rules and laws apply to both equally. Likewise, there may be drawn another distinction and division of attention into two classes: attention attracted by some impression coming into consciousness without any conscious effort of the will. This is called involuntary attention, for the attention and interest is caught by the attractiveness or novelty of the subject. Attention directed to some object by an effort of the will is called voluntary attention. Involuntary attention is quite common and requires no special training. In fact, the lower animals and younger children seem to have a greater share of it than do adult men. A great percentage of men and women never get beyond the stage to any marked degree. On the other hand, voluntary attention requires effort, will, and determination, and a certain mental training that is beyond the majority of people, for they will not take the trouble to direct their attention in this way. Voluntary attention is the mark of the student and other thoughtful men. They focus their minds on objects that do not yield immediate interest or pleasure, in order that they may learn and accomplish. The careless person will not thus fasten his attention, at least not more than a moment or so, for his involuntary attention is soon attracted by some passing object of no matter how trifling a nature, and the voluntary attention disappears and is forgotten. Voluntary attention is developed by practice and perseverance, and is well worth the trouble, for nothing in the mental world is accomplished without its use. The attention does not readily fasten itself to uninteresting objects, and unless interest can be created, it requires a considerable degree of voluntary attention in order that mind may be fastened upon such an object, and, more than this, even if the ordinary attention is attracted, it will soon waver, unless there is some interesting change in the aspect of the object that will give the attention a fresh hold of interest, or unless some new quality, characteristic, or property manifests itself in the object. This fact occurs because the mind mechanism has not been trained to bear prolonged voluntary attention, and, in fact, the physical brain is not accustomed to the task, although it may be so trained by patient practice. It has long been noticed by investigators that the attention may be rested and freshened either by withdrawing the voluntary attention from the object and allowing the attention to manifest along involuntary lines toward passing objects, etc., or, on the other hand, by directing the voluntary attention into a new field of observation towards some new object. Sometimes one plan will seem to give the best results, and again the other will seem preferable. We have called your attention to the fact that interest develops attention and holds it fixed, while an uninteresting object or subject requires much greater effort and application. This fact is apparent to anyone. A common illustration may be found in the matter of reading a book. Nearly everyone will give his undivided attention to some bright, thrilling story, but few are able to use sufficient voluntary attention to master the pages of some scientific work. But right here, we wish to call your attention to the other side of the case, which is another example of the fact that truth is composed of paradoxes. Just as interest develops attention, so it is a truth that attention develops interest. If one will take the trouble to give a little voluntary attention to an object, he will soon find that a little perseverance will bring to light points of interest in the object. Things before unseen and unsuspected are quickly brought to light, and many new phases and aspects of the subject or object are seen, each one of which in turn becomes an object of interest. This is a fact not so generally known, and one that it will be well for you to remember and to use in practice. Look for the interesting features of an uninteresting thing, and they will appear to your view, and before long the uninteresting object will have changed into a thing having many-sided interests. Voluntary attention is one of the signs of a developed will, that is, of a mind that has been well trained by the will, for the will is always strong, and it is the mind that has to be trained, not the will. On the other hand, one of the best ways to train the mind by the will is by practice in voluntary attention. So you see how the rule works both ways. Some Western psychologists have even advanced theories that voluntary attention is the only power of the will. That power is sufficient, for if the attention be firmly fixed and held upon an object, the mind will do the rest. We do not agree with this school of philosophers, but merely mention the fact as an illustration of the importance attributed by psychologists to this matter of voluntary attention. A man of a strongly developed attention often accomplishes far more than some much brighter man who lacks it. Voluntary attention and application is a very good substitute for genius, and often accomplishes far more in the long run. Voluntary attention is the fixing of the mind earnestly and intently upon some particular object, at the same time shutting off from consciousness other objects pressing for entrance. Hamilton has defined it as consciousness voluntarily applied under its law of limitations to some determinate object. The same writer goes on to state that the greater the number of objects to which our consciousness is simultaneously extended, the smaller is the intensity with which it is able to consider each, and consequently the less vivid and distinct will be the information it contains of the several objects. When our interest in any particular object is excited, and when we wish to obtain all the knowledge concerning it in our power, it behooves us to limit our concentration to that object, to the exclusion of others. End of chapter 10.